Hello and welcome to Not a Buffalo, the show where we discuss the science and technology that will save the world. My name's Jack, and yes, I'm going to talk about Mars again. This is Ben, and he wrote the intro before we started recording, so I can't guarantee that we'll talk about Mars again. But Ben, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well. And I hope we do talk about Mars again because some big news has been coming out of the Red Planet since the latest NASA mission reached there. So maybe it will come up, but of course, we make no guarantees about anything on Not a Buffalo, except the fact that there probably won't be Buffalo. But how are you, Jack?
I'm good. How does news come out of a planet?
It gets beamed by the rover and the helicopter and the.
At the risk of sounding pedantic, and I'm aware that I'm already being pedantic, wouldn't that be coming off the planet? Because if it was coming out of the planet, I would assume it would have to be inside the planet.
Depends on what you consider the planet. Like, do you consider the atmosphere part of the planet?
At the risk of sounding planetist, I don't think Mars has got a particularly impressive atmosphere. I think Earth is much
Mars does have
better.
a much better atmosphere, I agree, but Mars still has an atmosphere, and if you count that as a planet, then the
Yeah.
rover is inside the planet.
Yeah, fair.
But you're probably right. It is off the planet. That makes more sense. Yeah.
But it also it sounds weird, doesn't it, to say the news is coming off the planet.
Yeah, that it's like you're scraping the news off or
Yeah.
something.
Which technically is kind of how it's doing it, isn't it? It is literally like scraping rocks off it and being like, oh, analyze the rock.
Yeah, that probably is the most apt turn of phrase, then I guess.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to convince anybody, but yeah, so there's some interesting news coming off the red planet, you say, Ben.
There is, but we should get to that later
We should
because
get
neither
to
of my
that
stories has anything to do with Mars and the red planet. My first story is actually all about cracking open cellular membranes. But
Before
sorry,
we get started on that, maybe we should
yes.
mention that this is the finale of the season.
I was going to do that at the end. I'm just going to kind of, like, once people are really happy, they've just listened to a great podcast, they're in a great mood, and then just kind of kick them while they're at the most vulnerable.
That's what I like about you, Ben. You just want to fight everybody.
No. No, we should mention, yes, this will be the final episode of season 2 because we both need a summer and we have some big plans that we need to come up with in order for season 3 to go ahead.
That's actually quite a large part of it, isn't it? Is the fact that we are making a larger plan for this and we don't have the plan. Basically, our plan is to make a plan, which is,
Yes.
as I think, all great success stories start with having a plan to make a plan, right? That's how it
Exactly.
works.
Also, I'm joining the circus.
They never start by doing things.
I say I'm joining the circus this summer so that I can raise enough money to hire a social media manager to do the social media for us because I've been really terrible at it lately. Can we get someone here to vouch that I'm a nice person?
You're
please?
a lovely person. You're a lovely
Hey!
person.
Thank you. I'll put the gun down now. Not the same. I don't know why I was holding a gun. We're millions of miles apart. No, that doesn't make any sense. We're thousands of meters apart.
We're thousands of meters apart.
That's more accurate than millions of miles.
Yeah, not really. Not massively. If you were 2 million,
Yeah, but we're definitely not 2 million miles. There's no point, unless you are on Mars. Even if you were on Mars, could you be millions of miles away? Yes. Yes, you could be.
yes.
What is Mars right now? What
I
happens
think
when you
to be
where's
brutally
Mars
honest, Ben, I don't think you could not be millions of miles away if you were on Mars. And also, that's the wrong form of measurement.
Well, that's why I changed it to thousands of meters, because it was not only the wrong system, but it was also inaccurate. As I can confirm we are both on the planet Earth, as far as I'm aware, anyway. And therefore, I cannot be millions of miles. And so it is more accurate to say thousands of meters. Many thousands of meters. I mean, it doesn't really make sense. You probably wouldn't measure the distance between us in meters if you were trying to measure it. But
The word is kilometers. The word is kilometers.
that's just like saying meter, but with a kilo at the beginning. So
Well, yeah.
what I'm talking about.
just as
I don't know what
as
I'm
Ben is like saying B but with an N at the end.
So, what about increasing cell-free vaccine production? That's cool, isn't it?
I don't have control over that, sorry. Do you have a story about increasing something production?
I do. Do you want to carry on rambling on, or should I get into the story? I can carry on wasting your time, to be honest.
Both of them work for me.
So this is a story that I came across in the journal Nature Communications, and it is entitled "Improving Cell-Free Glycoprotein Synthesis by Characterizing and Enriching Native Membrane Vesicles." And I believe I understand this, so bear with me.
It sounds reasonably straightforward.
So one thing that we are trying to do with vaccines, and that we often have to do with vaccines, and by we I mean the scientists who are actually smart enough to do this kind of thing.
So not us.
Not us, definitely
We, not us. Yeah.
Is to create conjugate vaccines. And conjugate vaccines are where you attach a weak antigen to a strong antigen in order to get the immune system to respond to the weak antigen. Because often an immune system won't be able to respond to the weak antigen because it's weak. And so you attach it to a stronger antigen, the immune system recognizes the strong antigen and also then builds up the resistance to the weak antigen at the same time. The way you normally do this, or the way the scientists normally do this, is by they get a sugar which is specific to the weak antigen, and use that and attach that to the proteins of the strong antigen. But that's actually quite difficult to do. It's quite time consuming, and you don't get very high yields from doing it. And so what scientists at Northwestern University have discovered is a way of massively increasing the production yields of these protein-based vaccines by about 5 times, which allows them to create obviously a lot more medicine. So what they do is they use something called cell-free synthetic biology, which is the technique. So they've created a new manufacturing platform for vaccines called in vitro conjugate vaccine expression, made possible by the cell-free synthetic biology technique. Normally, when you are creating a vaccine,
so there's no biological element at all. It's all done completely.
Yeah, so I should have explained this beforehand. So cell-free synthetic biology is where you get rid of the cell's membrane and then you just use the machinery of the inside of the cell. Which allows them to basically work, because the membranes often get in the way, because that's kind of what they're designed to do. They are designed to protect the cell's machinery.
Yeah.
And also you have to keep the cell alive with the membrane. But if you can get rid of it, they found ways of just using the inside of the cell, activating it that way in order to get the response they want to create the vaccine. And actually that also enables them to freeze dry it, which freeze drying, like coffee, it enables you to store it for months and move it around a lot more easily than some of the vaccines we've heard of recently. I can't remember which one it is now. The COVID vaccine that needs to be kept at very low temperature. I think it's most of them, isn't it? The AstraZeneca and the Moderna one need to be kept. Yeah, they need to be kept at very low temperatures. Yeah. But what the scientists at Northwestern University, led by Michael Jewett, who's the leader of the study, he is a professor of chemical and biological engineering at Northwestern's McCormick School of Engineering and also director of their Centre for Synthetic Biology, is they had a look at the membranes that they were getting rid of and try to think of a way that they could actually use them. What they realise is that when you get rid of the membrane, or when it's broken apart, they reassemble into these things called vesicles, which are spherical structures that carry important molecular information. And they found that when they actually characterised these, they could use them to create a better delivery system to get the sugar from the weak antigen and attach it to the protein. So it basically speeds that up and makes it a lot more effective.
Yeah.
And it's enabled them to increase the amount of vaccine that they can create using these methods. So the example they use here is that they were able to create 40,000 doses per litre per day, costing about $1 per dose. So using a 1,000-litre reactor, which they say here is about the size of a large garden waste bag, they could generate 40 million doses per day, which is a 5-fold improvement over what it was beforehand. And they've also actually been able to use this.
That's amazing.
And they've also been able to use this technique previously to combat antibiotic-resistant bacteria as well. So you can create a way of combating the bacteria using the same kind of method as well. But yeah, huge breakthrough and obviously something that we're all pretty concerned about, given now we're all probably pretty familiar with the pandemics and the importance of vaccines right now. And so this new manufacturing platform will enable us to create vaccines for lower costs, much greater volumes, and keep them and store them, because the freeze-drying method for a lot longer as well, and then easier to store and transport. So yeah, that's my first story.
That's pretty great. That was going to be my main question, was about scale, but you've answered it immediately. You mentioned that they use sugars from the weak antigens, right? And I was just curious if maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. Why is it that the immune system just doesn't pick up on these weak antigens if they don't have a strong one with them, which obviously acts as a conduit? I understand that bit, but I'm just curious as to why it doesn't respond to weaker antigens. Is it just that it's not enough of a threat to get the immune system all riled up.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my understanding. Yeah, essentially because it is a weak antigen, it simply doesn't provoke enough of a response in the immune system to enable it to actually develop the defenses against the bacteria. And should they get it in the future, when the antigen, because the antigen is something created by the virus itself, or so if it's only a weak antigen, then yeah, it just doesn't stimulate enough of a response, but it can still hurt. And so you still want to be vaccinated against this virus or this bacteria. And so yeah, we need to make sure that they stimulate the immune system and get the vaccine, get the immune response, so that it is ready for if they are ever infected by the virus or the bacteria. So yeah, they just have to transfer. They have to attach the weak antigen to the stronger antigen. And I said sugar because I didn't want to say the actual word, which is oligosaccharyl transferases.
Fair.
I think I got that right. Which basically it's the antigen is carried by a sugar molecule, and they attach it to a protein molecule and a strong antigen, and that's how they create the vaccine. Is my understanding. But
Cool.
they started off doing this actually with E. coli, and again they spelt that out as well. And I don't think I can pronounce that either. I think it's Escherichia coli. Escherichia coli.
Yeah, because Escher coli is the one that just it looks like it's 4-dimensional, but it's actually 2-dimensional.
What do you mean it looks
You know.
4-dimensional? I've not heard of that.
Well, it has the staircases inside it, sort of, that lead to itself. That's Escher coli. It's an MC Escher
Yeah.
reference.
I was trying to remember the name of the person.
There we go.
Those are cool. I love them.
I'm sorry. That was perhaps too much of a left field.
It wasn't. It's just my brain was so trying to think of. I thought it was just a different type of E. coli. It's like, wait a second. Oh no, wait. He's referring to the artist and the set. So yeah, that's my first story. A vaccine breakthrough that could really help us see off other pandemics in the future.
I mean, that's kind of fantastic and awesome in like every way.
Yeah, and just really cool. I always love science stories where they've gone, we normally discard this thing, but actually let's look at it and see what we can do with it and see if it can help. And they found, a great way of doing it. And then I should mention as well that the study was co-authored by Neha Kamat, who is the assistant professor of biomedical engineering at McCormick and is an expert on cell membranes.
Nice.
And just more generally, kind of cell-free systems are something that is relatively recent, I believe, as a kind of breakthrough in synthetic biology and in this kind of science, this area of science. Something that's becoming more and more useful. It allows them to work with the cells without having to deal with keeping the cell alive and having it replicate and duplicate and everything. So really useful technique in and of itself.
Nice.
That's my first story. But have you got any more questions, or have you got a story for us?
I have a story. I have no questions actually, because that was a very like nice covering of it. I think I understood it. So my first story has nothing to do with cell membranes or vaccines. It's actually the return of your favourite form of matter and mine, Ben, the Bose-Einstein Condensate.
Ooh.
Bose-Einstein condensates, just to recap, are made of a single element, many atoms of a single element cooled to a fraction above absolute zero, and then they start doing weird things where they start behaving like a single particle, which is weird, That's not really what you'd expect. You wouldn't expect if you put like millions of hydrogen atoms together that they would behave like one hydrogen atom. You'd expect them to behave like a million hydrogen atoms. But they don't if they get super cold, because they start sharing states and funky stuff like that. The difference with this breakthrough is that it's not a single type of atom that they're made of. It's a molecular Bose-Einstein condensate.
Okay.
This has been a goal for a while in physics. The trouble with molecules... Darn molecules. The trouble with molecules is they are much more energetic and unstable than single atoms. A single atom is perfectly happy to stay relatively still. It doesn't stay still because it's really a whirling bunch of properties that don't map to physical reality very well, at least on our scale.
That's quantum.
In practice, it does... It works, If you try and put a big blob of, say, water molecules into that kind of scenario, you wouldn't do it with water, but never mind, then things get bad fast because they just move too much, basically. They have too much energy and they move around too much, and that destabilizes the whole quantum scenario. But what they've managed to do is, by constraining them to a 2-dimensional sheet, they were able to produce a molecular Bose-Einstein condensate, which is kind of cool. They made it as a kind of gas using cesium atoms, and then they collided them and bound them together once they got very, very cold using magnetic forces, and that created dicesium molecules. So as a result, you suddenly have a molecular Bose-Einstein condensate, which is kind of fantastic.
So this sounds like a complete breakthrough in the world of physics. They're able to make Bose-Einstein condensates that are far more complicated than anything we've been able to make before.
Yeah, it's fantastically fundamental, because it's one of those things we don't know, for example, what a molecular Bose-Einstein condensate can do. That's how fundamental this is. They didn't go, let's test the properties of this. They just went, oh my god, we've done this. Let's publish. That's how much of a big deal this is, that it's possible to do. You know, is it possible to do with more complex molecules? Maybe not. Maybe they won't be as easy to control in a purely magnetic way, but maybe there are other ways of keeping it to a two-dimensional configuration. Maybe that's possible. But the fact that this is possible creates a sort of blank canvas for physicists to just go, okay, let's take this forward. Let's do something interesting with a Bose-Einstein condensate. But a molecular Bose-Einstein condensate, not the rubbish one since we've had since like the 90s. I think this is fantastic. But yeah, so that's what will it lead to? I cannot say.
But it's great when we get to talk about these stories that are so at the cutting edge, like we don't even know what this can do, but the fact that we've done it is incredible. And, well, correct me if I'm wrong, by keeping it to a 2D layer, you mean it was basically one atom or one molecule thick?
Yeah, exactly. It's a gas, and they maintained it using a magnetic field.
Wow, okay.
So that levitates it and constrains it and keeps it in a purely two-dimensional, one molecule thick layer.
That'd be really boring to watch from the sidelines.
It would. You'd need a very powerful microscope to get any kind of joy out of that, and even then, atoms would be constantly in your way. You wouldn't see any of the action. It was Zedong Zhang, I'm sorry Zedong, from the University of Chicago who did this research. Well, he was the lead physicist on it, and the rest of the team I'm not going to pronounce the names of because there's a fair few of them. Sorry, team. Zedong gets this one.
As always, we will put the link to the article in the show notes so you can look them up themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look them up yourselves.
Do you have a second story for us, Ben?
Yes, and I am going to revel in trying to pronounce these names because we're going over to Italy, and I love the sound of the Italian language and the Italian names. So we are looking at a bit of research that has come out of the Politecnico di Torino, led by, or coordinated, I should say, by Professor Fabrizio Piri and his colleagues Matteo Caprioli, who was a PhD student under the supervision of researcher Ignazio Ropolo. They were in collaboration with the Professor Magdassi, who is from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. And they've been looking at 3D printing hydrogels, which is really cool. But just to remind any of our listeners who aren't familiar with them, they are basically polymeric materials, which from everything I can gather just means plastic. They are plastic materials which contain a large amount of water. Have I got that wrong? That's what I could...
Polymers are basically plastic. Polymers are plastics.
And they have the potential to reproduce the features of biological tissues. So we really want to develop hydrogels for biomedicine, i.e. being able to help heal if you have lost tissue or things like skin, for example. Hydrogels could be really useful for replacing that and helping to heal like that. But in order for hydrogels to be able to replace organic tissues or be used instead of organic tissues, they have to have two essential requirements. One is that they have to possess great geometric complexity, and the second is that after suffering damage, they have to be able to self-heal independently, just like you would if you cut yourself, for example, your skin would be able to. And that's proven really challenging.
I can imagine.
A lot of scientists have been able to create hydrogels that are either or. They can either be self-healing or they can have modelable properties in complex architectures. And what the team have done here, and they are in the Materials and Processing for Micro and Nanotechnologies team at the Department of Applied Science and Technology in Politecnico di Torino, is they've been able to find a way of creating a hydrogel that has both properties, and by just 3D printing it with commercially available materials, and using a commercial 3D printer as well.
That's fantastic.
It's really cool. So yeah, they specifically use a 3D printer that does digital light processing, and their main comparison was to extrusion methods, which is basically where you try and force the hydrogel through a die essentially to create the shape, the form that you want. But 3D printing, probably a lot of us are very familiar with it, but basically it scans it into the polymeric resin and just does it layer by layer and building it up and up and up. And yeah, the ones they were able to create were able to both self-heal, and incredibly, this really amazed me, is they were able to self-heal. I think it was 72% within 12 hours they were able to repair themselves. So after they cut them, it was able to restore 72% of the damage in just 12 hours at room temperature as well. They didn't have to expose it to a lot of heat or extreme temperatures or anything like that. And, they said...
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I have a question. How much does skin do in 2 hours?
No, sorry, in 12 hours it was, not 2 hours.
12 hours. Sorry, in 12 hours.
Probably... I'd imagine probably more because you have the blood clotting and you have the scab forming, and I imagine that's probably all a bit quicker than the 12 hours. But I honestly don't know the comparison, actually.
I've got no idea how to even begin to think about it, because I'm just like, I don't know whether my skin and my body heals like 99% and then doesn't do the rest for ages, or whether it like heals 50% and doesn't do much, or whether is rebuilding the skin the majority of it. I have no idea how you even quantify it.
That's a good point.
I mean, if it's repairing like a thing that's a homogeneous mass, like this hydrogel you're describing, I totally get how you can measure that on like a sort of linear gradient up of just like, yeah, bonding 2 bits of it is half as much as bonding 4, but I genuinely don't know how it maps to normal healing of human skin.
Yeah, so the example they use here is that printed dog bone samples showed an average of 72% recovery in tensile strength after healing for 12 hours, which sounds pretty good.
It sounds good, yeah. I'm just very curious to know, 'cause maybe it's better.
I'm not sure it's quite better yet, but obviously you would use this when someone does not have, they need this obviously as a supplement. You're not going to go turn around and replace someone's skin or bones with hydrogel. We're definitely not recommending.
Well, I wouldn't do that, Ben, but I don't know about you.
I definitely wouldn't. Not yet. Not until it's way better. I want to see
next month.
I want to see Wolverine levels of healing before I start replacing my skin with this kind of stuff.
I wasn't really imagining you doing it to yourself. I was imagining that after you've kicked the person while they're down, you then replace their skin.
That was like a lot of effort, and this stuff still seems quite complicated to make, even though, as we said, it is commercially available materials and commercially available 3D printer. But I have neither of those things. This thing does actually list the ingredients as well, and where they bought it from, I think, in the paper. So definitely have a look through that. If you happen to have a 3D printer or fancy buying one, or want to try and print your own hydrogel for benevolent purposes only, of course.
Yeah, no replacing other people's skin.
Exactly. But they also say, I've never heard this term before, but they also say it would have applications in soft robotics. And I presume just they mean that because obviously hydrogel, mainly water, it is soft. You're not going to make a bending robot, to go back to Futurama references from earlier, which we probably might have cut out by now, actually. You're not going to make a Boston dog type robot out of this stuff, but in terms of soft robotics, you could use it for that. Biomedicine, obviously, a big application for it. And even just I imagine it could have a lot of uses in space as well, where it might be difficult, you might not want to take the tools to repair something, but having a material that can self-heal itself relatively quickly would be really useful as well. For example, in a spacesuit, I can imagine having a spacesuit that heals itself relatively quickly would be pretty useful out when you're doing a spacewalk or when we finally get to Mars.
Soft robotics, I can totally see the application there. Because, like, what do you do if say you've got a robot where it's walking on, say, foam pipes or something like that on the side of those and rolling along on those? What if one of the foam pipes splits?
Yeah.
If you have the option for those foam pipes to sort of reseal themselves by it just, like, detecting the break and rotating in a certain way, that's kind of amazing. That's a lot more like durability for your soft robot.
Exactly, yeah. So really cool, I think, piece of technology, and the fact that they've managed to combine the two essential requirements into this in a way that seems relatively accessible, certainly to other scientists in the area all around the world, is really cool. Yeah, that's my second story. So new vaccines and new tissues. Have you got another story for us, Jack?
I do have another story for us.
Let's hear it. I imagine it has nothing to do with hydrogel.
No, it's got nothing to do with hydrogel. The story I have is, again, physics, to do with gravitational waves and things which are like black holes but are not black holes. Which I think, just about everyone can get behind a black hole because, it sucks you in. perhaps you don't want to be sucked into a black hole, or perhaps you want to, I don't know, see beyond the event horizon. And this particular type of object, which we're going to talk about, and I don't know exactly how I'm segueing into this, but there are two parts to this story, basically. There is the fun exotic object, and there is good old LIGO. Are you familiar with LIGO, Ben?
I'm familiar with it, although don't ask me what the letters actually stand for, because I can't remember.
I couldn't either when I first read LIGO. I had to go and look it up, because I was like, I know where they are. I know who they are. I cannot remember what that stands for, but LIGO, LIGO, is Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. It was, I think I'm getting this right when I say it was the first place on Earth to detect gravitational waves. Essentially what they have is they have a setup where they have a moving section and they have a laser on another section, and if the moving section moves relative to the laser detects it to within a really, really tiny amount, and it's also shielded from a lot of the natural particle noise that comes off the sun, because it's underground, and it's, I think, got a combination of artificial shielding and also like a natural rock layer that protects it. But that's LIGO. And a paper has theorized that in the next few years, LIGO might be able to detect a thing called a compact star, or an exotic compact object. So a compact star is pretty straightforward, right? That's what gets you. What they mean by compact is they mean what physicists always mean, which is much more of the thing than you would anticipate in a normal scenario. So a compact star in the normal scenario becomes a black hole because it has been compacted an awful lot by the weight of it dying and collapsing in on itself. But this can also happen to exotic stars if they exist. Big asterisk there. Like, exotic stars haven't been observed, so these are stars made of unusual types of matter. So it's the idea that you might have a quark star, for example, which is a scenario where neutrons have been squeezed enough at a very, very high heat, and they sort of decompose. They just sort of fall apart into quarks, and as a result you have a star which is primarily or entirely made up of quark matter, which is kind of weird because you don't really think about quarks forming things large enough to be stars, but that's sort of what they're talking about. Exotic stars like that. The specific one thereafter, I think, is the boson star. Similar kind of scenario, but formed out of fermions, and they give off a gravitational radiation, which is why they think that LIGO, because of its gravitational detection apparatus, might be a good place to pick it up to detect these things.
And do you know why they have theorized that these stars exist? Is there something in the pre-existing science that suggests they would, or is this just an idea that there's no reason they wouldn't exist?
Yeah, it's that kind of level of it's possible. It's allowable within the known laws of the universe, although, they may be wrong. That's always possible. Like, every time we thought that they were right, they were wrong, so there's no reason to assume that they're right now. But yeah, they're allowable within the current laws of the universe that we understand. And if they're out there, detecting them, it would support the current theory of the universe. And it would rule out other theories as well, which is important.
Being able to eliminate one of them and having less left is always handy.
It's always good to narrow down the options of the universes you're living in. There's also another gravitational wave detector, which is based in Japan, called the Kamioka Gravitational Wave Detector, or KAGRA, which is, I think, is relatively new. So yeah, it'll be probably next year, the year after, if they were to be found, that we'd hear something about these. Observation set that would pick them up would start in summer next year. So yeah, maybe a few years after that, something like that. Which is kind of cool. Like, it's very, like, close in big picture terms.
I'm right thinking that gravitational waves, it's something we've discovered relatively recently, isn't it? Also, it seems to be a big area of research at the moment. So it's something a lot of people seem to be getting more and more excited about. Is that just because we now have the equipment to measure them?
I guess. I mean, we know they're real now, right? Because until we had the equipment to measure them, it was just like, well, yeah, we think that they exist because of relativity. We don't know. We haven't observed them, so we can't say for sure. Lots of other things support relativity. Would this support relativity? Yeah, sure, it would support relativity, but we don't know that it exists, so we can't. So I think that's why they're having a bit of an outing at the moment. Is because they recently were. Well, I say recently, like it's got to be about a decade ago now that LIGO discovered gravitational waves, right?
Yeah, it's always because the experiments take so long and they have to crunch through the data, and obviously the equipment takes so long to design and build. It never feels like it's been that long because you only ever get the announcement every so often, or it'll be suddenly they'll make an announcement like, "Oh, this came out of nowhere," but then they'll be like, "Oh, actually, it's because they've been working on tweaking things for 10 years."
This is the thing I think is often perhaps not understood about science sometimes, is that it is immensely slow. It's immensely slow. It's immensely accurate as well, but it is immensely slow in a lot of places. You sometimes get these phases where stuff moves fast when a breakthrough is found, but the majority of the time it is very, very hard work, but so totally worth it.
That was a really cool story, and I think now that our stories are done, it's time for No Context Corner. So Jack, what am I describing?
Is it Mars?
Yes.
Because you gave it away a little bit in the intro that you wrote for me to read. Not that I want to ruin No Context Corner, but my concern is I have too much context.
What flew south for approximately 133 meters at an altitude of 5 meters and then turned back around for then turned back around and did a whole round trip of 266 meters and was in the air for a total of 117 seconds.
I mean, Charlton Heston, obviously. But in this instance, I imagine you're describing the Mars rover's flying helicopter thing.
Ingenuity. I am, indeed.
Okay, so we can't talk about Charlton Heston.
Well, we can if you want. It is No Context Corner, but we did say we were going to mention Mars.
I don't particularly want to. I just thought that's, you described him so well.
I did, but, that's the beauty of being well-read is one thing describes many things.
Yeah, all of them Charlton.
So, yeah, we just wanted to give an update on Ingenuity, which it is, as Jack said, it is the little helicopter that they've sent to Mars and has, at time of recording, completed 4 flights. And that doesn't sound that impressive, the fact that it flew at altitude of 5 meters for about 117 seconds. But they're doing this on another planet. Remember, that is, as we've established earlier in the episode, millions of kilometers away.
Rubbish at having an atmosphere.
And rubbish at having atmosphere.
Which is pretty useful if you want to fly. Like, having something to fly in is very, very useful.
Definitely helps. And it's gathering some incredible photos. So what I think we'll do is I'll link... So I'm getting this information from the NASA blog. And this latest blog update is from Mimi Aung, who is the Ingenuity Mars helicopter project manager at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which has to be said like that.
Yeah, it's how they've always said it ever since they founded it, isn't it?
You can't not say it like that. But it is sending back some incredible aerial photos of Mars. And I love that all the NASA team have to wear orange polo shirts to fly the helicopter.
And say Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Yeah. That's, yeah. No one ever says JPL.
Never.
No.
Because that could mean so many things. I mean, that sounds like...
Jam, peanut butter, and LIGO.
It sounds like a type of digger, I was going to say, or a type of bulldozer, maybe. But yeah, also could stand for jam, peanut butter, and LIGO. Incidentally, those are the 3 things that can get Jack excited. Not in that way.
Yeah,
not in that
and
way.
Charlton Heston. I'm just like so dour. That's the thing, isn't it? So you're always telling me, aren't you? You're telling me, Jack, stop being so dour. You're so dour today.
Honestly, it's how I normally start.
I'm like, show me some jam. Show me some jam, mate. Like, bring the jam. Bring the peanut butter.
I regularly send Jack a peanut butter jelly sandwich before recording, and I make sure it arrives.
And I keep telling you, they decompose and rot in the post. And you keep doing it. I feel like we've now removed any context this might have had.
Potentially.
Potentially.
Anyway, yeah, helicopters on Mars are ingenious and appropriately named so. So yeah, we just wanted to give you all an update on the Mars helicopter and on Mars because, yeah, the latest mission is just incredible. Well, shall I take us out, or is there anything else you want to say?
Apart from yeah, I look forward to speaking to everybody again next season. Then no, not really.
Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe to the show to never miss an episode and rate and review us wherever you have the power to do so. If you'd like to get in touch, we are at Not a Buffalo Pod on Twitter and Instagram, Not a Buffalo Podcast on Facebook, and you can contact us through the website notabuffalo.wordpress.com. As Jack mentioned, this is the last episode of this season, and we'll be back to you probably in September. So keep an ear out, keep reading science, and we look forward to speaking to you all again then. Bye.
Bye.